What if the biggest factor driving your clients' financial decisions isn't strategy, but psychology? My guest today is Doug Lynam, author of Taming Your Money Monster and From Monk to Money Manager, and host of the brand new podcast, Monsters and Lighthouses. Doug's path is anything but typical, from Marine Corps officer, 20 years as a Benedictine monk, and then now a financial advisor, helping clients understand the deeper forces behind their money decisions. In this episode, we explore how tools like the Enneagram and Attachment Theory and how his work combining those two reveals the hidden patterns shaping how your clients manage money, some of the questions and concerns that they typically have when they come to you, and then how those same things affect the way that you lead your team and even how you serve your clients. Doug and I also talked about how to use this insight in your business, from hiring to messaging, and Doug shares practical advice on book marketing, podcast guesting, and launching his own show. So if you find yourself having mindset and psychology type conversations with your clients, but you're also sort of interested in how understanding your Enneagram and deeper understanding of attachment theory could help you in your business, but would probably also help you serve clients better, then this episode is for you. Welcome to Podcasting for Financial Professionals. I'm Virginia Elder, founder of Podcast Abundance, where we help you use podcasting to market your business, to increase your authority, to get more eyes on your practice, and to capture leads for your business. If you're an investment advisor, tax strategist, business finance sleuth, or wealth management professional who wants your podcast to actually support growth, not just create content, you're in the right place. I made the podcast conversion blueprint just for you. It walks you through exactly how to turn your listeners into clients using a simple framework you can apply right away. The link is in the show notes. Here we go into today's episode. Doug, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Well, thanks, Virginia. It's an honor to be on your show.
Okay, so I have so many questions. I see your book there in the background, 2 of them now. Let's start with just share a little bit about your story. I know there's Marine to monk to money manager, and then you also just switched firms. And so I know all the advisors out there just kind of want to go, okay, let's put this together. How did you get here?
Well, I grew up in a fairly affluent family in the Midwest where money was relatively abundant, but weaponized from my childhood perspective. When my parents divorced, they used cash as a tool to control and domination of the battlefield of the divorce. And so I ended up having really negative attitudes around money and materialism and the whole corporate structure, which was really just projecting my daddy issues, I think, onto the world of finance. So I ran away in rebellion. I first went to the Marine Corps and I went to officer candidate school. I graduated top of my class, and then I realized that unresolved anger issues and high explosives were probably a bad combination. So I was looking for a higher calling than the Marines, and I was looking for the meaning of life and trying to figure out some deep existential questions. So I ran off and joined a Benedictine monastery, which was a great way to flabbergast my parents. And might not know, but spite is the reason why some young men join monastic orders. And it was a good adventure. I had a great time there. But turns out I was in a community where everyone hated dealing with money as much as I did. And so I was there for 20 years, but about year 2 or 3, our community ended up going bankrupt because we took the vow of poverty just a little too seriously and found ourselves in a deep financial hole. And by an ironic twist of fate, I ended up being the one to take us out of it. And so I had to go learn all about money and finance and became the business manager for the community. And then started helping monastery guests with their financial struggles when they would come looking for help. They would ask me to pray for them. I'd be like, sure, that's great. But, a budget also might really be helpful as well. We could do both. And if I could relieve the suffering from their financial struggles. Most of their spiritual and psychological anxieties almost always had some financial component in the background, either directly causing their struggles or as a secondary issue. That if I realized I could really relieve a lot of suffering through good, prudent financial advice. And so I started doing that as my pro bono service for many years. I was in a teaching order. I was the head of the math department at a private school as well. So I started teaching econ and personal finance. Now, fast forward 20 years later, the community started to fall apart and I was ready to leave. So I decided to make a pivot into finance and became an investment advisor. That led to a 2-book deal from HarperCollins, and I've got a great TEDx, and here we are all these years later. That's the quick version.
I love it. Thank you. A little tip for the folks out there, that what Doug just did in 3 minutes is what you need your guests to do on their show. So well played, Doug.
Thank you, Virginia.
Now, as we're listening, I mean, we know that typical stress, whether it's business or personal finances, I mean, we know it's got something to do with some childhood event, some psychological drama, and we know this and we talk about it. And there are a lot of financial advisors out there that talk about mindset and, childhood trauma and things like that as related to money. So if someone's listening thinking, well, I try to address this, what are they missing maybe? Or like, how can they do a better job at doing this with their clients?
Well, I think the first it's a complicated question, and I have a lot of tools for that. But the very first pass at it is what I call the attachment theory of money. And that's understanding that when we have financial trauma, or there was a report in Forbes magazine that 1 in 4 Americans have PTSD symptoms from financial trauma. And among millennials, it's 1 in 3. And others of us have, lesser versions of that. But when we face stress of any kind, we have our limbic system really has 4 choices, which you're probably familiar with. There's the fight response. There's fawn. We can sort of fawn over the situation or a person to try to relieve tension. And then we can flee or we can freeze. And we can then take those 4 stress responses and put them into 2 buckets. What I call the anxious attachment to money. That's when people get really, whether they're in the fight or fawn mode over their finances. They become like Ebenezer Scrooge, or they get to be neurotically compulsive around saving, or they have a really hard time with letting go of control. Then they're really what I would call money anxious. And then the other type, which I'm sure advisors are probably even more familiar with, given who comes to in our doors, are people who are money avoidant. Those people who they're paralyzed in a freeze response or in a flee response. They don't want to deal with it, and that's typically why they're hiring someone to take on their CPA work or to do their investment work, because they don't love this stuff and they want to outsource it, which is a good idea for those folks. But being able to understand that, and we can bounce between those 2 things, whether we're depending on the category of our financial life. So most people are actually kind of what I call a jumbled style, and then there's also those who are very healthy in their attachment style to money, and that's great. But when we have these 2 choices of anxious or avoidant, it might show up in different areas. A different one might show up in a different area of our financial life, in what I call the 4 pillars of finance. And those 4 pillars are going to be earning, saving, investing, and giving. So earning, saving, investing, giving, 4 simple pillars. But you might see people who are like maybe very anxious around the earning piece, but then they're avoidant around saving. They might spend everything they make on stuff. Or you meet people who are really anxious about the saving part, but they're terrified of investing, and so they're avoidant around that. Or they've got the investments, but then they never give back and do anything meaningful with their wealth. And so they're maybe avoidant around the giving. So that's a quick framework. And then it gets much, much deeper than that when we layer on this thing called the Enneagram, which I'm happy to talk about if there's time. But that's a quick framework to help understand the money mindset that your clients are coming in with.
Yeah, I do want to get into the Enneagram because I think a lot of your work has really centered around this combination of Enneagram. So you're learning personality types and then plus these attachment theories. And when you marry all of that, it's, I was looking on your site, there's some really cool graphics that kind of give you some clues into what we're dealing with here. Before we get into the Enneagram piece, how do we know what a potential client's Enneagram even is? Like, hello, potential client, walk in my door while you're waiting, take this Enneagram quiz. Like,
Right.
how do we even get into that?
Well, it's not appropriate for all clients. Not all clients want to go that route. They don't. They just want you to. Some people just want you to stick to the numbers. But for those who are open to it, there are a lot of online assessments you can send to clients. Some are free, some are paid. I usually send the paid version to my clients because there's one called the IEQ9 that I like a lot, and then I will just send them that link and ask them to fill it out if they're open to it, and that has about a 95% accuracy rate. I'm also very familiar with the Enneagram, so I'm also really good at doing a quick armchair diagnosis of folks. And then because of my books, because of their popularity, a lot of people are coming in because they read the book, Taming Your Money Monster, which is all about the money attachment style and the Enneagram. So they are already pretty familiar with that stuff. I would say a third of my clients already know their type before they walk in the door. Another third are really curious to find out, and maybe a third, it's just not their thing, and that's fine.
So that tells me like this is not only work that you've done and kind of immersed yourself with and studied, but like in a way, you've also carved out a niche because of that interest of yours. You're attracting people who have a similar interest. So that's kind of a clue and something really cool as far as business that you've been able to do.
Yeah, it's been a helpful calling card.
Yeah, let's get into how you might quickly diagnose someone. I think I'm a one. It's been a really long time. Fire away.
Well, for those who aren't familiar with the Enneagram, it's a personality typology system. It basically, the word Ennea in Greek means nine, and gram means drawn. So the word Enneagram is these nine archetypes of personality, and we typically draw them on a color wheel. So if you think of a spectrum, and we take that color wheel and divvy it up into nine even pie slices, your personality tends to fall kind of on a spectrum somewhere in a range of personality types. And it's actually been validated by the American Psychological Association, and we've grounded it now in neurobiology and childhood developmental psychology. So it's got some real roots and legs to it. It's not just this woo-woo system. These nine types, they fall into three quadrants. So we could take these nine types and put them into we call the triad. So there's three types in each triad, giving us nine types in total. And it's really based on your personality has many components to it, and the Enneagram doesn't explain all of it. It just explains the ego defenses you developed in childhood to help you cope with the biggest stressors that you faced in your childhood environment, to help you survive and navigate childhood in various ways. So it's sort of your childhood trauma, essentially. And we know that in all mammals, there's three core negative emotions. And that's what these triads are. It's like, which of the big three negative emotions did you get hit with a little bit more of in childhood? And those three emotions are going to be anger, grief, which is sometimes thought of as shame. And then the third one is fear. So anger, grief, and fear. So the first question I would ask someone when they're trying to figure out their type is, well, which of those three emotions do you tend to go towards more when life gets hard? If you look back on the overall pattern of your life, do you tend to experience more anger when life is hard? Do you go more to a grief or shame spiral, or do you end up more in a fear response? And so it's a hard question, and not everyone has maybe the introspection to answer it accurately. But if you can answer that one question, we can narrow things down pretty quickly.
Yeah. I'm sure mine is anger. I will get mad.
So then that gives us three choices to choose from. So now we just went from 9 options to 3.
Quick question. Is your podcast actually bringing in clients or just downloads? Those are two very different things. If you want your podcast to generate leads for your business, you need more than great content. You need a conversion strategy, which is exactly why I made the podcast conversion blueprint. With this free download, you learn how to structure your episodes, what to say in your call to action, and how to move listeners into your pipeline for your business. If you want to start growing your business with podcasting, grab the link in the show notes and download the podcast conversion blueprint today.
There's 3 ways that you can process that anger as a child. You can externalize it, which is kind of like having a food fight with the world, where you take that anger and you sort of push out against the boundaries around you. And that's what we call a type 8. They're often called the challenger. And I use car metaphors, so I think of them as the Humvee of egos. They're sort of bold and brash, and they can sort of roll over any obstacle in front of them, but they're not very fuel efficient with their opinions. So the biggest fear, and you can tell your type by the greatest fear that you have, the greatest it's an unconscious fear. It's really hard to even see it until someone points it out to you. But for an 8, it's this fear that they hate being harmed or controlled. So they like to take charge and stay in control. Does that resonate with you at all?
In certain moments, I don't see myself as being like egotistical or like I would run people over.
Yeah.
That may be my husband.
Yeah.
Is that work too? Or married couples like in the same
Well, this is great for couples therapy, and it's great for team dynamics. So for investment advisors and CPAs, it's really helpful to know the Enneagram types of both your partner, your spouses, but also your business partners and your colleagues, because you understand what's really driving their deepest motivations and how to work with them more effectively and build better teams. And I do coaching around that. If anyone wants to check that out.
Yeah, that could be helpful for team building for sure.
The other choice for anger is you can internalize that anger and you can drive it towards yourself, which is kind of like giving yourself an emotional wedgie. And that's what we call type 1. And type 1s are often called the improver or the reformer. Their greatest fear for them is being bad or defective in some way. So they have this deep inner critic in their head that's always telling them to do it the right way, shape up, get it right. So that anger drives inward, so they're very self-critical as opposed to being more externally critical. And so they can see the flaws in themselves most of all, but they also are very quick to see the flaws in other people and other systems around them. Like I had a good friend who was a type 1, and I took him to the nicest restaurant in Santa Fe for a treat, and we walked in the door, and the first thing he noticed is that there was a painting that was crooked on the far wall, and he had to call the waitress over and say, "Hey, that painting over there is crooked. Like, could you fix that for me?" And he couldn't settle in his chair until he had to point it out and he had to fix the painting. So I don't know if that resonates with you. Type 1 is something that might be more resonant with your experience.
Yeah, I definitely think so. The inner critic is very strong, and I've done a lot of work around that for sure.
And then there's a third choice, which I won't go into, but then you can have both internalized anger and the externalized anger. And that gives you type 9, which is called a peacemaker, but I won't bother with that explanation. But I think we've landed on your type. So so basically with those 2 questions is just which is your deepest, which of those 3 negative emotions, anger, grief, or fear, do you have more of? And then you just kind of got to go around those. Okay, now you got to pick one of these 3 quick descriptions, and you'll generally find a pretty accurate diagnosis that way.
And then you already mentioned, Taming Your Money Monster would have more information about the Enneagram piece that we went through one little third of it, but then also the attachment theory work. And so do you feel like advisory clients need to be reading that book, or do you feel it's useful for other advisors to read this book and be able to start to learn some of the tools?
Oh, I think it's really helpful for both, but especially for advisors, because once you know where, and it takes some practice, but once you get familiar with the system, it's pretty easy to start typing people. It can be fraught with difficulty if you don't do it right. But once you understand what your client's Enneagram type is, you have a better ability to service them more effectively. Because even in just broad strokes, if you just know what triad they fall into, if they're in the anger, grief, or fear triad, you know something right away. If they're in the anger triad, what they're really looking for is control and empowerment. So that's going to be kind of how you want to focus your conversations about building a plan for them that gives them more control, makes them feel like they've got can take charge of their life, and give them that kind of sense of security in that way. Where if you're in the grief or shame triad, what they're looking for is for validation and connection. So it's more heart sort of centered. They're looking for validation of their decisions. They want to feel that there is, and they need an emotional connection to you as the advisor. That's going to be first and foremost was what they're looking for when they're interviewing you, or even when you're in client meetings, to sort of lead more on that emotional side, perhaps sometimes more than the number side, although the numbers are still important. And then if you're in the fear triad, then what they're looking for is certainty and security. So you're dealing with fear, so you want it to be able to present your plan or your services in a way that's going to help them feel like they're really safe. They're looking for safety and security, and that's going to be the thing that is going to be important for you when you're understanding even their risk tolerance. Like it's going to be very different for those folks than it is for other types. So that's just one of many, many, many different applications that this has for investment advisors.
I love that. And I'm picturing in my mind right now, this could work if you're interviewing a new CPA, or just any kind of, um, estate planner, like whoever is going to be working with your money as a consumer interviewing up, right? I'm hoping that the professional could key in on some questions that they ask, right? Like if I'm looking into a new CPA and I'm asking questions about um, how they handle if I were to come under audit and things like that, that would kind of signal the fear based piece. And I would need you to lean in to that. Like, I clearly have fears around, being audited, something being wrong, fees, things like that. So,
Yeah, attention to detail is going to be important to a one.
I'm just seeing this application across a variety of professions in the financial field. So that's really, really amazing. I would love to hear more about your books and your book journey. You already mentioned you got a deal with great publisher. How did this come about? Did you just dive into research and say, okay, like I've got this framework, I've got this thing I've discovered and I'm putting it together and you're just pitching your book, or like how did that work for you?
Well, it's a long story in my bio that I left out. So I really got interested in finance because when I was teaching, I was doing a high school economics class, and for a class project one day, I opened up the school retirement plan to show the kids how it worked. And what I found was a train wreck. There was no fiduciary oversight. The fees were high. The fund performance was terrible. And then I did an RFP and tried to find other companies that could do a better job. And I really couldn't find one. And so I realized that this was actually not just a problem for my school. This is a pain point endemic across the country. So that's how I launched my own RIA firm from inside a monastery to go initially to go build better 403B and 401k plans for schools and nonprofits. And then, of course, eventually moved into individual wealth management over time. But when I did that, right when I left the monastery and went into business, the New York Times did a 6-month expose on the problem of teacher retirement plans across the country. And they're pointing out all the problems I had started my business to solve. So I reached out to a guy named Ron Lieber, who's the financial columnist to the New York Times, and said, "Hey, I love what you're doing with these articles. And here's a little bit about my weird monk story. And here's what I'm doing to try to solve this problem." And then he got very excited about it and reached out. And 2 weeks later, he flew out to Santa Fe and did a big story on me that hit the front page of the New York Times on the business section and went viral. And then next thing I know, I got flooded with book deal offers. And Thomas Nelson, which is a division of HarperCollins, they reached out and said, "Do you want to do a book deal?" And I said, "Sure." And they gave me a 2-book contract, and I kind of won the literary lottery. So it was really random. I hadn't planned to be an author. I always loved books and writing, but I never thought that was going to be part of my journey. But someone hands you a six-figure book contract, it's hard to say no.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, what I'm hearing through that is just when you see something that interests you and you may feel like, who am I? But you send them a message, like pursue that, just give them that compliment and you never know what it could turn into. So, what did you do from there? Okay, you wrote the book, it's published. Well, now I got to sell books. What was the plan there?
Well, podcasting is a big part of that. Launching my own podcast and then being guest on those shows has been really helpful for that. And then just, doing the social media dog and pony show, get my YouTube channel up there, doing speaking engagements as much as I can find, as I can, wherever I can grab them, and doing whatever I can to just market and promote the book. There's a lot of tricks to it, but there's no one thing. It's to kind of put it all together.
Yeah, it's a layered strategy, I'm sure. Now, you've been guesting on shows like this where I get to interview you and you get to be the star and talk about your book and everything. How long have you been doing that? And do you have like a strategy around which shows you agree to be a guest on? I mean, how have you navigated that game?
Well, I started by hiring, a podcasting agency to start, and was paying a pretty high premium for that every month. It was expensive, and they were getting me on good shows, and they were doing all the bookings for me. And then I realized that I could actually save myself a bunch of money and do a lot of it myself. So once I kind of learned the ropes, then I kind of went solo. And how we met, I started using a thing called Podmatch, which is a great booking, sort of like Tinder for show hosts and guests, where people like us can match up. That's been a really good tool. And then also just being involved in different chat groups and forums where you're networking with other professionals, you'll find they often have their own podcasts. And if you can just keep your eye open, they're always looking for guests. It's amazing how frequently I run into people saying, I've got a podcast, I'm looking for, and then you just keep your eye out for the ones that are a little more in the premium space rather than there are a lot of I've learned to be much more selective over time about whose show I'm on, because there are some that are not really worth your effort, but there are plenty. It's just there's lots of ways to get on shows. It's very something you can bootstrap yourself without a lot of take some time, but without too much money, and it really does help for both lead generation for clients and also for if you have a secondary product to sell like a book or a service.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, is there because that was the question in my head and I'm sure in a lot of folks' heads was okay, but like I don't want to say yes to every show. There are a lot that I probably don't want to be on or they're smaller shows or they don't have a US listenership or I mean there's so many factors. So have you decided, okay, I won't be on a show that has less than 50 episodes, or I won't be on, like what are your metrics that you're looking at now?
Well, a lot of it, there's certain metrics are like, okay, is this an interesting person who, if I meet somebody, will I have fun doing it? And if the answer is yes, I'll probably say yes because, a lot of times what I found is a lot of business connections happen between the guest and the host, even more so than between the listeners and the guest. So you network with a lot of really interesting people. So if the host is someone I really want to be introduced to, I'll take the show, have a deeper relationship with for whatever reason. And then, for example, on Podmatch, you can look at all the metrics, how many episodes they have, what their social following is are, how many downloads their show gets, how many reviews their podcast has gotten from other guests. So I've learned to really screen those out. And if something's a brand new show or doesn't have a lot of downloads or doesn't have a lot of likes, then I'm gonna take a pass on that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate Podmatch because some of that is available, but then also because the communication is within the platform. I did a whole episode on like how to get guest spots and not do terrible AI pitches and things like that. I will still to this day be completely frank about, people email me all the time, either trying to get somebody on my show, trying to get me on their show, whatever. I just delete them because most of the time they're not a good fit. And inside, well, And I don't want them filling up my inbox. Like I have other more important things that are in my inbox. And so when I'm ready to do guesting, I log into Podmatch and it's this container for me to work within. So yeah, a little shout out to Alex there. Okay, so you mentioned you've been guesting for a while, but you just launched your own show. So that is just really exciting. That absolutely makes my heart sing. I would love to hear kind of your thought process behind that and how it's going. Where are you within that launch process?
Well, we just launched our first episode last week, and we've got about 5 episodes in the can. We're going to dribble them out, like one every 2 weeks, and then we'll start bringing guests on fairly soon. But I have a co-host, so I was really resistant to doing a podcast because it felt like it was a really flooded space, and I just wasn't sure it was going to be worth the time and the effort. But basically my co-host is a wonderful guy named Darren Newborn who was a fan of my book, and he reached out and wanted to partner with me and said, "Hey, could we do something together?" And I was like, "Well, okay." And so the great thing is he's really helping me with the back end work, and I'm kind of doing the front end. I'm bringing the IP, the intellectual property, and he's really helping with the technical side of it. So that's been really great pairing for the two of us so far. And he's also a wonderful business and finance coach in his own right. So we pair up well. We have a good banter, and we have similar interests. So that's just been a fun project to do, and I'm really excited about where we can take it.
So back up just a little bit. What was the past like 60 days like before launch? Like what were some of the conversations you guys had? Um, with there being two of you and you're in two separate businesses, did we discuss, where are we driving traffic and is this fair to both of us? And
We're st-
give us the
and
behind the scenes there.
yeah, we're still having those conversations are ongoing. We still run into some snags, but basically we both have somewhat or some overlap, and we're trying to not step on each other's toes. But we've basically made it our goal to I'm going to promote him, and he's going to promote me, so that way we're cross promoting each other rather than trying to pitch ourselves, which I think works really well. And then just making sure that we haven't gotten to the point where there's any monetization at all yet, of course, but we've tried to work out an even 50-50 split across the board for any business that comes through that process.
Yeah, very good. Did you guys talk about, the commitment to this and like how long you're going to do this before you start evaluating numbers and, um, give us the business side of the podcast here.
Well, I think we just both got really. He's a 7 and I'm a 3 on the Enneagram, and I think we both our enthusiasm just went wild when we connected, and we're like, we're just going to go do it. And I know it's maybe not the best plan, but we're in it for the long haul. With the realization it's going to take a while for anything like this to gain traction. So we're not expecting huge results right away, but we're having fun doing it, and then hopefully it will grow into something meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm just, of course, looking from the outside in, but you've already got two published books with a well-known publisher. You mentioned earlier, speaking gigs, social media, all the things that you would typically do to market a book. What can you take from that journey and apply to the podcast? That's also maybe like some tips for the folks listening.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the important thing is to have, as you know, it's all marketing funnel. So, we're not expecting to make money off the podcast per se. Great if it does, but it's really about making sure you've got all the pieces. It's one part of an integrated strategy towards something else. So obviously for me, it's investment advisory services and also coaching services. So it's about thinking about what the top of your funnel is and what the bottom of your funnel is, and how does that where in that process does your podcast fit in. So I would say it's more top of funnel. It's just more about getting people excited about my brand and who I am, and getting to know more about my content and getting engaged, and then hopefully driving them more towards my advisory work. That's where the real money is.
Absolutely. Well, I cannot let you go without you telling us what your show is called and where we can find it. I see the books there behind, but just for the audio only listeners, if you'll tell us about those as well and where to find them.
Yeah, well, some of the books are From Monk to Money Manager, a former monk's financial guide to becoming a little bit wealthy and why that's okay. It's my first book in 2019. And this newest book is called Taming Your Money Monster, 9 Paths to Money Mastery with the Enneagram. And then the podcast is called Monsters and Lighthouses, Enneagram, money, and finding your higher purpose. So those are my big, that's the marketing bits.
Yeah. And where should we go to find these? Are they all available kind of in one spot or do we need to go to different websites?
Oh, well, you can find everything on my website at douglynam.com, DOUGLYNAM.com. But the books are available from retailers everywhere, including Amazon. It's a great place to go, of course, for ease of access.
All right. Thank you, Doug. Is there anything else that you want to share that might help some of the financial professionals listening? Something I didn't ask or accidentally excluded?
Well, I do want to connect two dots for the listeners. We talked about the attachment theory of money at the beginning. We talked about your Enneagram type. What we didn't do is connect the attachment theory of money to your type, and which is really the core of the book. It's like, okay, now you know what your Enneagram type is. Now, it would be fun maybe in a later episode to talk about, well, how does that money anxiety or money avoidance manifest uniquely for your Enneagram type? And there's 2 money monsters then for each of the 9 Enneagram types. And that's kind of just the core idea of the book, just to make sure that people understands that's what's happening.
Okay. Wow. So 2 money monsters per Enneagram type. I mean, this just like keeps expanding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. But we can get more about that in your book.
Yep, Taming Your Money Monster. Check it out. You'll
Okay.
find
That's what it's all
a
about.
deep dive there.
Okay. I love it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Virginia. I really enjoyed your show.
Thanks so much for listening to Podcasting for Financial Professionals. If you want your show to do more than just educate, if you want it to generate leads and bring in clients consistently for the long haul, make sure you're using the Podcast Conversion Blueprint. This free download helps you structure your podcast to attract new listeners, refine your messaging to nurture them, and capture those listeners when they're ready as your next best clients. And of course, practicing what I preach when you sign up for your free download of the Podcast Conversion Blueprint, you're going to land on my email list. Hit reply to any newsletter because I'd love to learn about your show or about your ideas for a show. I'll point you toward your next best step, whether that be light support like an audit of your show or becoming a member of the Academy. Or maybe you need full service strategy and accountability like what I do inside the Podcast Conversion Lab. Thanks again for listening to Podcasting for Financial Professionals. If you enjoyed today's episode, stick around for the next few episodes because each one incrementally helps you improve your podcast.